like a Hellcat.
Hello and welcome back to the channel where once again it's time for another first impressions video, and it's another Wii game today, and it's a racing game this week because I felt the Wii is one of these systems where you're not going to think of racing games as being its primary strength unless you're thinking about Mario Kart or maybe some of those Sonic racing games. It doesn't strike me as a console that's got more realistic racing games that are of actually a decent level of quality. So I picked up Colin McRae Dirt 2 for £2 from CEX recently, and I thought, you know what, we'll cover it in a first impressions video and see exactly what it's like. Now, it came out in September of 2009 on pretty much all the consoles available at the time: Xbox 360, Wii, PS3, PSP, Nintendo DS. It had a PC release in December, and then it came out on the Mac in 2011. So once the main menu hits, you've got single player, multiplayer and options. Heading into options, you've got controls, driving aids and changing the sound volumes. If you go into the driving aids, you can select how much support it gives you whilst you're racing. You can also turn rumble on or off. So once you head into the one-player mode, you'll see you've got World Tour, which is the main experience. You've got Arcade mode, which gives you Exhibition, a 5-race championship and time trial races. And you've got Challenge mode, which is very similar to the Crazy Box mode on Crazy Taxi, where you've got loads of little mini games you have to try and get the best scores in them. As always, I'm going to start with visuals first, and I have to say I was pleasantly surprised by how good I felt this game looked for a Wii title. I feel everything is quite clear and sharp, and it's really easy to see everything. There's hardly any pop-up throughout the game, and the level of detail on the cars is actually pretty decent as well. In terms of the courses and the tracks, they do look somewhat basic. There isn't much level of interactivity with any of the scenery. You can only knock over occasional plants or road signs. Everything else is pretty static in all fairness, but there is a reasonable amount of variety between all the courses, so I don't feel that I got bored whilst I was playing this game going through all the different tracks. In terms of how it runs, I was actually surprised by how well it runs as well, because there are occasional little bits of slowdown on some courses, but it's nothing that's really even noticeable unless you're really looking for it. In terms of how well it runs in multiplayer, I couldn't possibly say because I didn't have anybody to test out 4-player split screen. I'm going to have to imagine that it runs at a reduced frame rate and reduced levels of detail on the courses, but I do feel overall this is actually a reasonable looking Wii game. In fact, if I was going to summarize it, I'd say it almost looks like a budget PS3 game, and that might not sound like much of a compliment, but in all fairness, when you consider how much more powerful the PS3 and the Xbox 360 were than a Wii, I don't think it's too much of a disrespect to the console, and I feel overall Colin McRae Dirt 2 visually was a pleasant surprise. So moving on to the sound effects and music, and my first impressions of this area were not particularly good because I felt this seemed like the weakest area of the game for me. There's not much music in the game because there's no music playing whilst you take part in any of the races. Now, that wouldn't actually be too much of a problem if all of the sound effects within the races were really good, but I feel the engines are okay and the cars sound pretty good in that regard, but there's horrible screeching noises that the cars seem to make when they're going around the track. They just don't seem right to me. Now, I'm not a massive rally racing game expert, but I've played a few. Played Sega Rally, I played like the original Colin McRae and the rally modes on the Gran Turismo games, and I don't remember them sounding anything like this. As well as that, the cars sound like they're really rattling, like they're going to fall apart at times, and it just doesn't quite seem right, and overall it doesn't do it for me. Now, it didn't bother me too much because I was actually enjoying playing the game, and because it's got such a great sense of speed, I wasn't taking too much notice of the sound effects, but I have to say that overall in this area it wasn't particularly strong. So moving on to the gameplay next, and initially I was expecting a simulation style of gameplay with lots of tweaking of the cars, perhaps changing of parts and stuff, but instead it is the complete opposite. It is a 100% arcade racing through and through, and the most options you've got in terms of car changes is simply having a different body kit on your vehicle. That is it. But what this does do is give you a tremendous pick up and play racing game, and that is something that I wasn't necessarily expecting. Yes, some people will criticize it and say, oh, it's nothing like the PlayStation or the Xbox or the PC versions, and to be honest, I've no idea if it is. I've never played any of those, but I'm guessing those games do have much more realistic levels of depth to their gameplay. But what we've got here is a game that you can simply pick up, play and enjoy for a short amount of time in one go, and that actually appeals to me, and it may well appeal to older people who've got less free time on their hands. You don't need to invest hours of time into this game to practice and to master different techniques, because you can just pick it up and play and do relatively well at it, and it's actually fun to play. And another thing is the fact that you can just use a standard classic controller on it to play the game. You don't need to use any silly motion controls, and that was a big criticism from my point of view anyway with a lot of Wii games. When they released versions of games on a Wii, they tried to incorporate silly controls as a novelty value, and it really annoys me. Thankfully, Colin McRae Dirt doesn't do that, and you've got a game that actually plays really well. It's quite responsive. All the vehicles handle differently, so that is nice as well. So you have to adapt when you do different modes in the tour mode, because a lot of the time you'll have to do them with a specific vehicle, so you'll need to take into account it's not going to handle the same as perhaps the vehicle you used in the previous race. So I feel overall, in terms of gameplay, although it didn't give me the kind of gameplay experience I initially expected, what it did do was give me a tremendous pick up and play experience that I actually simply enjoyed. So in terms of content and lifespan, the main mode of play is the World Tour mode, which sees you progress through different races on varying courses of various difficulties, which is of course the way that you unlock the other cars and the body kits as well by progressing through these. Now, I don't really feel this mode of play is going to offer you a sort of long-term experience, because from doing the World Tour mode for 1 hour, I'd completed half of the challenges and had gold medals in every single one. So I feel this mode of play, even if the other races get more difficult, it's probably only going to take you 2 or 3 hours to play through the entire World Tour mode, which is somewhat of a disappointment. Now, you've got arcade mode as well, which is your exhibition, your championship and your time trial, with the championship being a 5-race tournament with points awarded for first, second and third, and then the winner being the most points after 5 races. That's very straightforward and it's very simplistic as well, and there's no reward for doing that either. The plus point for the arcade mode is that you can then play through that with the cars that you've unlocked in the World Tour mode. Now, there is a challenge mode as well, and like I said at the start of the video, it's very similar to the Crazy Taxi, Crazy Box mode, where you're given challenges and you have to try and do your best in all of them, and obviously if you do all of those challenges, it will unlock the hardest ones as well. So this breaks up the standard racing with some mini games as well, and it does add a little bit more lifespan to the game. You've also got multiplayer options, and you can have 4-player split screen, and I feel this game might actually be quite fun in multiplayer, assuming that it performs well enough. Obviously I don't have any multiplayer footage, so I don't know exactly how well it would perform in 4-player split screen. Obviously, with it only being the Wii, my thoughts would be that it might not be so great in multiplayer, but again, it's in the game. So in terms of content and lifespan overall, I don't think it's that impressive personally. Definitely wouldn't have the same lifespan as the PS3, the Xbox or the PC versions. So that leaves me with 2 final questions. Is Colin McRae Dirt 2 on the Wii a game that I would come back to and play more and potentially finish? And what final grade will I give it based on my first impressions? Well, I'll let you know that I've actually played this game again since recording the footage. I've actually got further in the World Tour mode, and I feel this is going to be a game where I want to finish the main 1-player mode. I'm not going to play through all the mini games on the challenges, and I'm never going to play it in multiplayer, but I do feel like I will finish the 1-player game because I've actually quite enjoyed my time with it. Now, what final grade am I going to give it based on that? I'm going to give Colin McRae Dirt 2 a pretty respectable C+, because I feel for £2 at CEX you can't go wrong. It's relatively enjoyable to play, and I've actually got a bit of interest now that I've played it to see it through to the end of the World Tour mode. Yes, it's not going to give you long-term value for money, I don't think, but when it's so cheap now, you don't need to worry about that. If I'd have bought this game brand new for $39.99 when it came out, I'd have probably been fairly disappointed to get the Wii version, because I don't think there's a whole lot of content in here. but because it's so cheap now, that is completely irrelevant. So a C+ is what Dirt 2 gets. Now, has anybody out there played Dirt 2 on the Wii, perhaps from start to finish, or have you played one of the other versions on the PC, the Xbox 360, or the PS3? If you have, let me know how they compare with the Wii version, because I have literally never played them, never seen any videos, I should say, for them, and I have heard there is quite a lot more in those games. I know that there was DLC released for those as well, I think, with more tracks and cars. So let me know your thoughts on those down below if you have played them, and like always, I'll be back in the near future with another video. Goodbye for now.